A first-class ticket isn't always a shield against prejudice. For Dr. Sophia Vance, a woman who navigated the complex corridors of international diplomacy, a routine flight became a battleground for her very dignity. The weapon, a sneer. The aggressor, a flight attendant who judged the sound of her voice before the content of her character. She thought she was mocking a nobody. She had no idea she was about to confront a woman who could dismantle her entire world with a single, quiet phone call. This isn't just a story about bad service. It's about the shocking moment when a UN ambassador unmasked the ugly face of bigotry at 35,000 feet and the global storm that followed. The polished chrome and hushed tones of the Global Skyways first-class lounge at Geneva International Airport were designed to soothe the souls of the world's elite. It was a sanctuary of muted conversations, the clink of fine porcelain, and the rustle of international newspapers. Within this curated tranquility sat Dr. Sophia Vance, a figure of quiet authority. Her attire, a tailored navy blue pantsuit and a simple silk scarf, spoke of understated elegance, not opulence. Her focus was on the briefing documents spread across her table, her brow furrowed in concentration. To the casual observer, she was just another well-dressed traveler. But the documents detailed a delicate negotiation concerning water rights in a war-torn region, a testament to her true occupation-shaping peace. Sophia's life was a tapestry woven from diverse threads. Born in Nigeria to a diplomat father and a literature professor mother, she had spent her childhood in a whirlwind of cultures and languages. Her accent was a melodious blend of West African cadence, the crisp enunciation of her British schooling, and the measured pace of someone who chose their words with the precision of a surgeon. It was a voice that had commanded attention in the hallowed halls of the United Nations, a voice that had calmed volatile standoffs and brokered impossible deals. It was to her simply the sound of her identity. As she boarded Flight 714 to New York, she was greeted by the senior flight attendant, Claire Sullivan. Claire was a veteran of the skies, a woman in her late 40s, with a helmet of perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a smile that was practiced to the point of being a mask. She saw the world in a clear hierarchy, and in her first-class cabin, that hierarchy was based on her own snap judgments of wealth and status. She scanned Sophia's simple though expensive attire and her focused, almost academic demeanor. No flashy jewelry, no designer logos screaming for attention. In Claire's calculus, Sophia didn't quite fit the mold of her usual first-class clientele, the tech billionaires in their casual chic hoodies, the Hollywood starlets hiding behind oversized sunglasses, or the old money heirs exuding an air of bored entitlement. "Welcome aboard, Ma'am Claire," said her voice, a pitch-perfect symphony of corporate politeness. "Thank you." "It's a pleasure," Sophia replied, her voice carrying the unique melody of her heritage. A flicker of something, a minuscule, almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes, crossed Claire's face. It was gone in an instant, replaced by her professional smile. "May I see your boarding pass?" she asked, a standard request, but her tone was a fraction too sharp. Sophia handed it over. Claire glanced at it, her eyes lingering on the name Dr. Sophia Vance, before nodding. "Seat 2A. Right this way." As Sophia settled into her spacious pod, she overheard Claire speaking in a hushed but audible tone to a junior colleague Liam near the galley. "Make sure to double-check her drink order. You never know with those exotic accents. Can be hard to understand." Liam, a young man with earnest eyes who was new to the first-class cabin, just nodded, though a faint blush crept up his neck. The words, though not directed at her, landed like tiny darts. Exotic. It was a word used to describe spices, or birds, or faraway lands, not a person. It was a word that othered, that separated. Sophia had encountered this type of subtle prejudice countless times. It was the conversational equivalent of a paper cut, small stinging, and a reminder that the world often saw her heritage before it saw her humanity. She let out a slow breath, turning her attention to the window. The snow-capped peaks of the Swiss Alps gleamed in the distance. She had more important matters to occupy her mind. She refused to let the small-mindedness of one person cloud the beginning of her journey. The pre-departure champagne service began. Claire moved through the cabin with a practiced grace, her smile warmer, more genuine for the passengers she deemed worthy. When she arrived at Sophia's seat, the mask was back in place. "A glass of champagne for you," she asked, her voice clipped. "Just some sparkling water with lemon, please," Sophia requested. Claire paused. No champagne. The question hung in the air, laden with an unspoken judgment, as if Sophia's choice was a further deviation from the first-class norm. "No, thank you. Water will be perfect." Claire's smile thinned. She turned away without another word. A few moments later, Liam arrived with the water. He placed it down gently, his movements careful, almost apologetic. "Here you are, ma'am," he said, his voice soft. "Please let me know if there's anything at all you need." Sophia looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the discomfort in his eyes. She gave him a small, warm smile. "Thank you, Liam. I appreciate that." The interaction was a brief, silent acknowledgement. He saw it. He heard it. And in the pressurized cabin, hurtling through the stratosphere, that small moment of shared understanding was a fleeting comfort. But the initial sting remained. Claire's contempt, subtle as it was, had set the tone for the flight. It was a quiet declaration that in this small, luxurious kingdom, Dr. Sophia Vance was an outsider. As Flight 714 climbed to its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, the first-class cabin settled into a comfortable rhythm. The hum of the engines was a constant drone, a backdrop to the quiet rustling of blankets and the soft clicks of silverware on china. For Sophia, it was supposed to be a 7-hour window to review her notes for the upcoming Security Council address, a precious, uninterrupted stretch of time. But a persistent, discordant note kept disrupting her focus. Claire Sullivan. The senior flight attendant's prejudice, initially a subtle undercurrent, began to manifest in a series of calculated slights. It was a masterclass in passive aggression, each act small enough to be deniable, but the pattern was unmistakable. When the meal service began, Liam came to take Sophia's order. She had pre-selected the seared sea bass with saffron risotto, a light and flavorful option. "An excellent choice," Dr. Vance, Liam said, with a genuine smile. "The chef recommends it." But 20 minutes later, it was Claire who arrived with the main course. She placed a different dish before Sophia, a heavy braised beef short rib. "Here you are," Claire announced, her tone flat. Sophia looked at the plate, then back at Claire. "I'm sorry, I believe there's been a mistake. I ordered the sea bass." Claire feigned a moment of mild confusion, tapping a finger against her lips. "Oh, did you? I'm so sorry we ran out of the sea bass just before we got to you. This is what we have left. I'm sure it's just as good." She didn't wait for a response, turning on her heel to attend to another passenger, a well-known tech investor in 3D, with an effusive offer of a vintage wine pairing. Sophia knew it was a lie. She had overheard the passenger behind her order the sea bass just moments after she had. It was a petty, deliberate act of erasure, making her feel invisible, as if her preferences were unimportant. She looked at the heavy meal before her. For a moment, she considered challenging Claire, creating a scene. But that was the goal, wasn't it? To provoke a reaction, to paint her as the angry black woman to justify the prejudice. Sophia would not give her that satisfaction. She simply picked up her fork and ate in silence, the taste of the food soured by the bitterness of the slight. Later, seeking to stretch her legs, Sophia walked towards the forward galley. She found Claire and Liam preparing for the next service. Liam was meticulously polishing wine glasses, while Claire was inputting data into a tablet. "Excuse me," Sophia said softly. "Would it be possible to get a cup of herbal tea chamomile if you have it?" Claire didn't even look up from her tablet. "We'll be starting the dessert service in about 20 minutes. You can have a hot beverage then." Her dismissal was absolute. Before Sophia could respond, Liam immediately put down the glass he was holding. "Of course, ma'am. It's no trouble at all. I can get that for you right now. How do you take it? A little honey, perhaps?" He moved to prepare the tea, pointedly ignoring the icy glare Claire was now directing at him. The tension in the small galley was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Liam, the dessert carts need to be prepped." Claire snapped, her voice low and menacing. "It will only take a moment, Claire," he replied respectfully, but with a firmness that surprised Sophia. He quickly prepared the tea and handed it to her with a look that was a mixture of apology and defiance. "Thank you, Liam." Truly, Sophia said, her words meant for him alone. As she walked back to her seat, she heard Claire's voice, a venomous whisper. "You need to learn who the important customers are, Liam. Don't waste your time pandering. She's probably flying on some sort of discount or a third-party booking. She doesn't belong here." The cruelty of the words, the casual assumption of her unworthiness was breathtaking. It wasn't just about her accent anymore. It was about her race, her class, her very presence in a space Claire considered her exclusive domain. Sophia sat down, the warm cup of tea, doing little to ward off the chill that had settled deep within her. She looked out the window at the vast, endless ocean of clouds below. She had spent her entire career fighting against the us versus them mentality, the very poison that fueled wars and divided nations. And here it was in a microcosm in the perfumed air of a first-class cabin. The young man Liam was a small beacon of decency in this unfolding drama. He clearly understood what was happening and was attempting in his own small way to counteract it. But his kindness only highlighted the ugliness of Claire's behavior. She wasn't just being rude, she was being deliberately cruel, using her authority to inflict small humiliations to reinforce a hateful, unspoken hierarchy. Sophia knew this could not continue. The issue was no longer a personal slight. It was an abuse of power that demanded to be addressed. The question was not if, but when and how. The cabin lights had been dimmed, casting a soft blue glow over the sleeping passengers. The flight was roughly halfway across the Atlantic, a period of quiet suspension between two continents. Sophia, unable to rest, had her overhead light on, illuminating the pages of a well-worn book of poetry by Wole Soyinka. The rhythmic beauty of the words was a balm, a temporary escape from the unpleasantness that clung to the air. The tranquility was shattered by a sudden sharp cry. A few rows behind Sophia, a young boy no older than 5 was in distress. He was crying, clutching his ear, his face flushed with fever and pain. His mother, a young woman who looked utterly exhausted, was trying to soothe him, her voice a frantic whisper. "It's okay, sweetie, it's okay. We'll be landing soon." The boy's cries grew louder, piercing the cabin's quietude. Several passengers stirred, groaning in annoyance. Claire appeared, her face a mask of irritation. "Mum, you need to quiet your child," she said to the mother, her voice devoid of any sympathy. "You're disturbing the other passengers." "I'm trying," the mother said, her eyes welling with tears. "His ear is hurting from the cabin pressure, and he has a fever. I don't know what to do." "Well, this is a first-class cabin, not a pediatric ward. Claire retorted, her voice cold. "Perhaps you should take him to the back of the plane." The cruelty of the suggestion was shocking. Sophia felt a surge of anger. This was no longer about her. It was about a fundamental lack of human decency. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "That is an utterly inappropriate and heartless thing to say." Sophia said, her voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight of authority that made Claire flinch. Claire turned, her eyes narrowing as she saw who had spoken. A sneer curled her lip. "This does not concern you. Please return to your seat." "It concerns me when I see a mother and a sick child being treated with such callousness," Sophia replied, moving into the aisle. She knelt beside the distraught mother. "My name is Sophia. I have some experience with pediatric first aid. May I see if I can help?" The mother looked at her, her face a portrait of relief and gratitude. "Oh, please. Yes, thank you." Claire stepped forward, her hands on her hips. "I am the senior flight attendant. I have the situation under control." "No, you clearly do not," Sophia said, not even glancing at her. She gently examined the boy's ear, speaking to him in a low, soothing tone. The boy, calmed by her gentle presence, slowly quieted his sobs. "It's likely an ear infection, aggravated by the pressure change," Sophia explained to the mother. "A warm compress will help." She looked up at Liam, who had been hovering nearby, looking horrified by Claire's behavior. "Liam, could you please bring a cloth soaked in warm water, and perhaps a child-appropriate pain reliever from the medical kit? Check the dosage instructions carefully." Liam nodded immediately and rushed off. This was the final straw for Claire. To be undermined, to have her authority so publicly challenged by this woman she had already dismissed as an inferior, was an intolerable insult. "Who do you think you are?" Claire hissed, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of the now awake passengers. "Waltzing in here acting like you own the plane. I've had enough of your attitude. I don't know what charity organization paid for your ticket, but you have no right to interfere with my crew and my cabin." The cabin was now silent, all eyes on the confrontation. The air crackled with tension. Sophia stood up slowly, her movements deliberate. She faced Claire, her expression unreadable. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "You ask who I am," she began, her voice steady and clear, the unique cadence of her accent filling the hushed cabin. "That is a fair question. My name is Dr. Sophia Vance." She paused, letting her name hang in the air. "I am returning from Geneva, where I spent the last 2 weeks chairing a series of meetings at the Palais des Nations. Those meetings were on behalf of the government I represent, and the international body to which we all belong." She took a small step closer. Claire, for the first time, looked uncertain, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "The ticket you seem so concerned about was booked by the United States Department of State, as is all my official travel. Because in my professional capacity, I serve as the Nigerian ambassador to the United Nations." A collective gasp went through the cabin. The tech investor in 3D slowly lowered his noise-cancelling headphones. The mother with the sick child stared, her mouth agape. Liam, returning with the warm compress, froze mid-stride. Claire's face went white. The colour drained from her cheeks, leaving behind a pasty-mottled mask of disbelief and horror. The sneer, the arrogance, the confident cruelty, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by raw, unfiltered panic. She looked at the calm, dignified woman standing before her, and saw not the target of her petty prejudice, but a figure of immense, global power. Sophia's gaze was unwavering. "You have spent the last several hours treating me not as a passenger, but as an inconvenience. You have insulted my voice, denied my requests, and publicly questioned my right to be here. And just now, you have displayed a level of cruelty toward a sick child that is frankly shocking. So to answer your question, Claire, she finished her voice, dropping to a near whisper, yet ringing with absolute finality. I am your problem. I am the passenger in seat 2A, and I am a UN ambassador. And I can assure you we will be discussing your conduct with your superiors the moment we land. The silence that followed Sophia's revelation was more profound than the engine's hum. It was a vacuum filled with the collective weight of shock, embarrassment, and dawning horror. For Claire Sullivan, the world had just tilted on its axis. The meticulously constructed hierarchy of her cabin, where she was the undisputed queen, had been obliterated. The woman she had tormented, the nobody with the exotic accent, held a diplomatic passport and a title that could unravel her 2-decade career with a single polite complaint. Her face, once a canvas of smug superiority, was now a crumpled mess of fear. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. The professional mask had not just slipped, it had shattered, revealing the panicked, small-minded person beneath. Her eyes darted around the cabin, seeking an ally and escape, but she found only the stunned, judgmental faces of the other first-class passengers. The tech investor who she had fawned over now looked at her with undisguised contempt. The older couple in 1A who had been sleeping were now wide awake, whispering to each other and shaking their heads. It was Captain Miller who broke the spell. A discreet chime sounded, and his calm, authoritative voice came over the cabin intercom, directed specifically to the forward cabin. Senior Flight Attendant Sullivan, please report to the flight deck immediately. The command was a lifeline and a death knell all at once. It removed Claire from the searing gaze of the passengers, but also signaled the official irreversible escalation of the crisis. Without a word, her face ashen, Claire turned and walked the longest 10 paces of her life to the cockpit door, her confident stride replaced by a shuffling, defeated gait. As the cockpit door clicked shut, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted again. The tension eased, replaced by a wave of hushed conversation and gestures of support for Sophia. The mother of the sick child, holding the warm compress to her son's ear, whispered, "Thank you. Thank you so much," her voice thick with emotion. Liam, who had watched the entire exchange with a mixture of terror and vindication, approached Sophia. "Ambassador Vance," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I am so incredibly sorry for what happened, for her behavior. It was unprofessional and it was wrong. There is no excuse." Sophia offered him a reassuring smile. "You have nothing to apologize for, Liam. Your kindness was a notable exception. Please just ensure that little boy and his mother are comfortable." "Of course, Ambassador." He hurried off, his movements now infused with a new sense of purpose. Minutes later, a different flight attendant, a woman from the business class cabin with a kind, serious face, entered first class. She approached Sophia's seat and knelt beside her. "Ambassador Vance, my name is Maria. Captain Miller has asked me to take over service in the first-class cabin for the remainder of the flight. He sends his most profound apologies and has assured me he will meet with you personally once we are on the ground. Please let me know if there is anything at all you need. Anything." The message was clear. Claire had been removed from her duties. The power dynamic had been inverted completely. Inside the cockpit, Claire Sullivan was facing a different kind of authority. Captain Frank Miller was a man known for his unflappable calm in emergencies, but his expression was now one of cold fury. His co-pilot, a younger man named Evan, stared resolutely at his instruments, pretending to be absorbed in his duties. But the tension was palpable. "Explain yourself, Claire," Captain Miller said, his voice dangerously quiet. Claire began to stammer, a frantic, incoherent jumble of excuses. "Frank, I didn't know. She was Her accent was just... I thought she was... It was a misunderstanding. The child was making noise and I was just trying to maintain order in the cabin. Miller cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. Save it. I don't care if she was the Queen of England or a tourist in sweatpants. We have a passenger manifest. We know who is on our plane. But that's beside the point. Your job is to provide exemplary service and ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers. Instead, I have a cabin full of witnesses who saw you bully a mother with a sick child and harass a diplomat. A UN ambassador, for God's sake. Do you have any idea the kind of international incident this could become? Claire's face crumpled. I made a mistake. A mistake. Miller's voice rose, losing its quiet edge. A mistake is forgetting to offer someone a refill on their coffee. What you did was a campaign of targeted disrespect, and it has put this airline in an incredibly vulnerable position. You are relieved of your duties. You will remain in the crew rest area until we land. You will not enter the cabin, and you will not speak to another passenger. Is that understood, defeated? Claire could only nod, tears finally streaming down her face. As she was escorted out of the cockpit, the weight of her actions finally crashed down upon her. It wasn't just a bad day at work. It was the end of a career built on a foundation of prejudice that had just crumbled beneath her. For the rest of the flight, the first-class cabin was a model of perfect service, with Mariah and Liam attending to every need with quiet efficiency. But the calm was superficial. A reckoning was coming, waiting for them on the tarmac at JFK. The incident at 35,000 feet was over, but the fallout was just beginning to gather force. The descent into New York City was smooth, the sprawling metropolis appearing like a jeweled circuit board through the clouds. But for the passengers and crew of Flight 714, the landing was anything but routine. The usual sense of relief and anticipation was replaced by a heavy, anxious silence. Everyone knew this was not the end of the story. As the plane taxied to the gate at John F. Kennedy International Airport, Captain Miller's voice came over the intercom, but this time it was a personal address to Sophia. Ambassador Vance, if you would be so kind as to remain in your seat for a few moments after we arrive at the gate, our ground staff leadership would like to speak with you personally. It was a request, but it carried the weight of a formal summons. Sophia simply nodded to Maria, who relayed the confirmation to the cockpit. The other first-class passengers, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, disembarked with a mixture of curious glances and respectful nods in Sophia's direction. The mother with the now sleeping boy gave her a final, grateful smile. Once the cabin was empty, two figures entered the aircraft. The first was Captain Miller, his pilot's hat in his hand, his face etched with concern. The second was a man in a sharp suit, whose name tag identified him as Richard Sterling, Vice President of In-Flight Services for North America. His smile was wide-polished and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the smile of a man whose job was to make problems disappear. Ambassador Vance. Sterling began extending a hand. Richard Sterling, on behalf of Global Skyways, I want to offer our deepest, most sincere apologies for the regrettable incident you experienced on this flight. Sophia looked at his hand, but didn't take it. She remained seated, her posture poised, forcing him to stand over her at a slightly awkward angle. Mr. Sterling, she said, her tone cool and measured. What specifically are you apologizing for? Sterling's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Well, for the unprofessional conduct of one of our staff members, for the clear lapse in our service standards. You mean the racism? Sophia asked directly, her gaze unwavering. You mean the fact that your senior flight attendant judged me, dismissed me, and humiliated me based on the color of my skin and the sound of my voice, let us name it for what it is. The bluntness of the question seemed to suck the air out of the cabin. Sterling, a man used to corporate jargon and carefully worded non-apologies, was visibly flustered. That is a very serious allegation, Ambassador. It is a very serious reality, Mr. Sterling, Sophia countered. It was not a lapse in service. It was bigotry. Do you have a corporate procedure for that? Captain Miller stepped forward. Ambassador, what Ms. Sullivan did was inexcusable. I have already filed a preliminary report, and I can assure you she has been suspended, pending a full investigation. Her actions do not reflect the values of the vast majority of our crew. Sophia turned her attention to the captain. I appreciate that, Captain Miller, and I commend the professionalism of Liam and Maria. They were exemplary, but your airline placed a person like Claire Sullivan in a position of authority. This tells me the problem may not be an individual one, but a systemic one. As if on cue, Claire was escorted into the cabin by another ground staff member. Her eyes were red and puffy. Her uniform looked disheveled, and her earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading expression. Ambassador Vance, she began, her voice cracking. I am so sorry. I had no idea who you were. It was a stressful flight, and I wasn't myself. I made a terrible mistake. Please, I have been with this airline for 22 years. Please don't let this ruin my life. Sophia listened to the apology, her expression unchanging. She heard the words, but she also heard what was missing. You are sorry because you found out who I am, Ms. Sullivan, Sophia stated quietly. Your apology is not for your behavior, but for its consequences. You weren't having a stressful flight. You were being a bully. You bullied me, and you bullied a mother with a sick child. What if I hadn't been an ambassador? What if I had been a teacher, a nurse, or a software engineer who had saved up for a year for this ticket? Would my dignity have mattered less? Would your behavior have been acceptable then? Claire stood speechless, tears now flowing freely. The truth of Sophia's words was undeniable and devastating. Her apology was hollow because it was rooted in fear, not remorse. Richard Sterling, sensing the situation was spiraling out of his control, stepped in again. Ambassador, we are prepared to offer you a full refund for your flight, of course, and a significant amount of travel vouchers for any future flights as a gesture of our goodwill. We want to make this right. It was a classic corporate maneuver. Try to buy silence. Sophia almost laughed. Mr. Sterling, you cannot place a monetary value on dignity, she said, finally, standing up to face him at eye level. This is not about a refund or free flights. This is about the culture that allows an employee like Ms. Sullivan to thrive for 22 years. I will be filing a formal, detailed complaint with your corporate headquarters. I will also be forwarding a copy to the FAA and the Department of Transportation. And I will be discussing this incident with my colleagues at the United Nations, many of whom are frequent flyers with your airline. Sterling's face paled. The problem was not disappearing. It was metastasizing. The threat of involving the DOT, and worse, the diplomatic community, transformed this from a customer service failure into a potential international business crisis. I will require the full names of all crew members on this flight and your direct contact information. Sophia continued, her voice now crisp and commanding. I expect a full report of your investigation on my desk within 10 business days. She picked up her briefcase, gave a final appreciative nod to Captain Miller, and walked toward the jet bridge without a backward glance at the two men or the weeping woman she left in her wake. As she stepped out into the bustling terminal of JFK, She took a deep breath of the New York air. The flight was over, but her new mission had just begun. Dr. Sophia Vance was a woman who understood the architecture of power. In the world of international diplomacy, she knew that the most devastating weapons were not bombs, but meticulously crafted documents. Upon arriving at her New York residence, she did not immediately rest. Instead, she sat at her antique mahogany desk, the city lights twinkling beyond her window, and began to compose her formal complaint. This was not a letter written in the heat of anger. It was a diplomatic communiqué, each word chosen with surgical precision, designed to dismantle a corporate fortress. Addressed directly to David Chen, the CEO of Global Skyways, the letter was a masterclass in controlled fury. It began by acknowledging her status not as a demand for special treatment, but as a credential establishing her as a credible witness. She then laid out the events of Flight 714 in a cold, chronological narrative devoid of emotional language, but damning in its detail. She documented Claire Sullivan's initial condescension, the lie about the meal service, the deliberate obstruction of a simple request for tea, and the venomous comments Liam had overheard. She described in heartbreakingly objective terms the cruel dismissal of the mother and her sick child. Crucially, she framed the entire affair through a wider lens. This letter is not intended merely as a complaint against a single employee, she wrote. Rather, it is a formal notification of a profound, systemic failure within your organization's culture. The confidence and impunity with which Ms. Sullivan acted suggests that her behavior is not an anomaly, but is in fact tolerated or worse, cultivated. This represents not only a failure of customer service, but a potential breach of the common carriage duty of care, which is predicated on the safe and respectful transport of all passengers, regardless of their origin, accent, or appearance. The final paragraphs were the most potent. She praised the conduct of Liam Fletcher and Maria by name, strategically positioning them as evidence that decency was possible, thereby making the alternative all the more inexcusable. She concluded not with a demand for compensation, but with a request for a detailed accounting of the steps Global Skyways would take to ensure no other person, regardless of their station in life, would have their dignity so casually stripped from them at 35,000 feet. As promised, carbon copies were dispatched via diplomatic channels to the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Transportation, transforming a customer service issue into a federal regulatory matter. The letter arrived at Global Skyways' gleaming Chicago headquarters like a silent ticking bomb. The CEO's executive assistant, accustomed to handling routine correspondence, recognized the official seal of a UN mission and immediately understood this was different. She walked it directly into David Chen's office, bypassing all protocols. Chen, a man who prided himself on data-driven, dispassionate leadership, read the letter once then, a second time. The color drained from his face. He saw past the polite diplomatic language to the brutal truth beneath. This was not a problem that could be delegated to a customer relations department. This was an existential threat to his brand, his leadership, and his company's bottom line. An emergency executive meeting was convened within the hour. The atmosphere in the 50th floor glass-walled boardroom was electric with tension. Richard Sterling, having just flown in from New York, immediately went on the defensive, his tone dismissive. It was a deeply unfortunate incident, David, no question. Sterling began attempting to project control. But it was the isolated action of one rogue employee who was having a bad day. A veteran flight attendant who made a severe error in judgment. We have suspended her. We will terminate her. I have already authorized a full refund and a generous compensation package for the ambassador. This can be handled swiftly and, more importantly, quietly. At the other end of the long, polished table, General Counsel Anya Sharma slowly shook her head, her expression a mixture of pity and exasperation. "Richard," she said, her voice cutting through his bluster, "you are fundamentally failing to grasp the strategic reality of this situation. This is not a customer complaint letter. This is a legal document." She has copied the Department of Transportation. By federal mandate, the DOT must open an inquiry based on a formal, credible allegation of discrimination. Handling it quietly ceased to be an option the moment she put that letter in the diplomatic pouch. She continued her words, landing like hammer blows. Furthermore, the complainant is a sitting UN ambassador. She is a politically exposed person. This has diplomatic implications. She isn't asking for money, she's asking for institutional change, and has created a paper trail to ensure she gets it. If we are seen to be stonewalling or covering this up, the political and regulatory fallout will be catastrophic. David Chen, who had been listening in stony silence, finally turned his cold gaze on Sterling. "Your attempt to handle it on the ground was an abject failure, Richard. You stood before a world-class negotiator, a woman who brokers peace in war zones, and you offered her travel vouchers. You treated her like a disgruntled tourist with a lost bag. You didn't just fail to solve the problem. You embodied the very corporate arrogance she's accusing us of. You proved her point." The rebuke hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Chen's order was absolute. "Launch a full, unsparing internal investigation. HR and legal will lead. I want a preliminary report on my desk in 9 days. I want to know everything. I want every file, every complaint, every piece of feedback related to that employee and that flight base. Do not hide anything from me." The investigation began with an intensity that bordered on panic. Liam Fletcher was flown to Chicago and interviewed for hours in a sterile HR conference room. The young man, though visibly nervous, recounted the events with unwavering honesty. He gave them specific damning details, but he also did something more. He spoke about the cabin culture on long-haul flights, the subtle but pervasive biases of certain senior crew members. He gave them other names, other dates, other flights, where he had witnessed similar, if less egregious, behavior. He wasn't just corroborating Sophia's story. He was exposing an entire ecosystem of prejudice. The investigators pulled Claire Sullivan's 22-year service record. It was a study in contrasts. Pages of commendations for operational efficiency were interspersed with a small but telling number of passenger complaints. One from 3 years prior was from a black businessman from Atlanta who complained of being treated with unwarranted suspicion and disdain. Another from a family with a Hispanic surname mentioned being spoken down to and treated like they didn't belong in business class. Each had been dismissed as a subjective personality conflict. Now, connected by Sophia's complaint and Liam's testimony, they formed a chilling, undeniable pattern. The final nail in the coffin came from the company's own anonymous employee feedback portal. A deep dive by the legal team, using keyword searches for bias, racism, and prejudice, unearthed a hidden history of discontent. Dozens of entries from flight attendants over the years described a toxic environment where senior crew members acted like feudal lords, rewarding those who looked and acted like them, and punishing those who didn't. Claire Sullivan's name appeared 4 times, described in one entry as someone who believes first class is her own private country club. 9 days later, Anya Sharma placed a 3-inch thick binder on David Chen's desk. "This isn't a Claire Sullivan problem, David," she said grimly. "It's a global skyways problem. We didn't just hire her, we created her. Our training is a joke, our oversight is non-existent, and our corporate culture has been a breeding ground for this exact kind of arrogance. As they were planning their response, the decision was taken out of their hands. Someone in the executive meeting, disgusted by Sterling's initial attempts at a cover-up, leaked the story. A single explosive headline appeared on the website of a major news organization. Exclusive UN ambassador alleges pervasive racism, culture of contempt on global Skyways flight. The corporate tsunami hit with breathtaking force. The airline stock price nosedived, wiping out nearly $500 million in market capitalization before the opening bell. The hashtag #RostoFlyWithDignity erupted on social media, becoming the #1 trending topic worldwide as thousands of people shared their own stories of mistreatment. The company's multi-million-dollar Connecting Worlds ad campaign was turned into a brutal collection of memes. David Chen stood in his office, watching the news on a giant monitor as his company was torn apart in real time. He knew a simple apology, and the firing of one flight attendant and one executive would no longer be enough. That was containment. What was required now was a complete, public and painful transformation. Dr. Sophia Vance had not just filed a complaint. She had held up a mirror, and the reflection was an abomination he could no longer ignore. The press conference was staged in the vast, sunlit atrium of Global Skyways' Chicago headquarters, a space designed to project an image of transparency and modernity. But on this morning, the gleaming marble floors and soaring glass walls felt less like a corporate showcase and more like a modern coliseum. Every major news network was present, their cameras forming a tight, unforgiving semicircle of unblinking electronic eyes. The air was thick with the low hum of anticipation and the sharp staccato clicks of camera shutters. This was not a standard corporate damage control event. It was a public reckoning, and the world had a front row seat. David Chen stood at the podium, a lone figure against the backdrop of his company's logo. Flanked by his general counsel Anya Sharma, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. The usual polish and confidence of a Fortune 500 CEO had been stripped away, replaced by a somber gravity that was both startling and necessary. He gripped the sides of the lectern, took a deep breath, and faced the glare of the lights. He began not with excuses, not with corporate spin, but with a direct, personal, and profoundly humbling apology. Good morning. Earlier this morning, I had the privilege of speaking personally with Ambassador Dr. Sophia Vance Chen, began his voice, steady, devoid of the usual executive cadence. I conveyed to her my personal shame and the profound regret of this entire organization. I apologized not just for the reprehensible and discriminatory treatment she was forced to endure on one of our flights, but for the deeper institutional failure that allowed such an environment of prejudice to exist and fester unchecked for years. Her dignity was compromised aboard our aircraft under our care. That is a stain on this company, and for that we are unequivocally and profoundly sorry. An apology, however, is not a solution. Words are meaningless without decisive, painful, and permanent action. What followed was a corporate restructuring so swift and severe it felt like a controlled demolition. Chen announced the immediate termination of Claire Sullivan for gross professional misconduct and a violation of the fundamental principles of human decency. This was expected, but he didn't stop there. Our internal investigation, which is ongoing and will be exhaustive, has revealed that this was not merely the action of one rogue employee. He continued, his eyes scanning the faces of the journalists. It was a symptom of a toxic culture we allowed to grow in the shadows. It was a failure of our training, a failure of our reporting structures, and a failure of our leadership to see what was right in front of us. Accountability must therefore start at the top. For this reason, Richard Sterling, our Vice President of In-Flight Services for North America, has submitted his resignation, effective immediately. His on-the-ground handling of the initial complaint was a masterclass in corporate indifference and a profound insult to the ambassador's intelligence. His leadership failed to foster a culture of respect, and for that failure he has been held accountable. A wave of frantic murmuring and furious typing swept through the press corps. Firing a flight attendant was protocol. Forcing the resignation of a senior vice president was a seismic event, a clear signal that this would not be business as usual. Chen pressed on his voice, gaining strength as he pivoted from punishment to reform. He outlined a sweeping, multi-million-dollar plan designed not just to fix the problem, but to transform global skyways into an industry leader in equity and inclusion. Effective today, we are retaining the services of the Sterling Rhodes Group, the nation's leading DEI consultancy, to conduct a root and branch overhaul of our entire corporate culture. This will begin with a mandatory in-person, multi-day training summit for all 50,000 of our flight attendants and pilots. This will not be another online module you can click through. It will be immersive scenario-based training focused on unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and de-escalation led by experts. He then announced the formation of a permanent independent passenger Bill of Rights committee, an oversight board with the power to investigate claims of discrimination and recommend disciplinary action, with its findings to be published in an annual public report. To ensure this committee has the integrity and global perspective it needs from day one, Chen announced Ambassador Vance has graciously agreed to serve as an unpaid inaugural advisor to help shape its charter and mission. We are incredibly grateful for her willingness to help us build a better airline from the ashes of this shameful incident. Finally, he turned to the actions of the junior attendant. In the midst of this darkness, there was a moment of light. The decency and courage shown by flight attendant Liam Fletcher, who treated Ambassador Vance with the respect she deserved, will not go unnoticed. He has been given a meritorious promotion. Furthermore, we are establishing the Fletcher Grant, an annual award and bonus for a frontline employee who demonstrates extraordinary courage in upholding our new core value dignity above all else. The karma for Claire Sullivan was as swift as it was absolute. Fired from the job that had been the bedrock of her identity for over 2 decades, she found herself a pariah in the industry she once navigated with such arrogance. Her name, now inextricably linked to the viral news story, rendered her unemployable at any other major airline. The informal networks of flight crews, once her social circle, now shunned her. She had built her world on a fragile hierarchy of her own making, and with one act of prejudice, she had brought it all crashing down. Stripped of her flight benefits, her pension slashed, she was forced to sell her suburban home, her small kingdom, at 35,000 feet, gone forever. She was left with nothing but the silent, bitter consequences of a lifetime of small hatreds. She had laughed at an accent, and in doing so, had permanently silenced her own future. The ripple effect, however, extended far beyond one woman's ruined career. The Global Skyways scandal became a watershed moment for the entire travel industry. The Department of Transportation, galvanized by Sophia's formal complaint and the intense public outcry, launched a sector-wide review of discrimination policies and passenger rights across all major U.S. carriers. Airlines that had let their DEI initiatives become stale box-ticking exercises were now in a panic, scrambling to implement meaningful change, terrified that the next Ambassador Vance incident could happen on their watch. Sophia never sought the spotlight. Her goal was never revenge, but accountability and meaningful change. In the months that followed, She worked quietly with the new oversight board via video conference, her diplomatic skills proving invaluable in shaping a system that was both robust and fair. She used her suddenly amplified platform not to gloat, but to advocate for a more humane world. In an op-ed published in a major international newspaper, she wrote, "Dignity is not a luxury item to be dispensed at the whim of an employee and reserved for those who look or sound a certain way. It is the fundamental currency of our shared humanity, as essential as the air we breathe. The skies, like the world they connect, must be open to all, not just in principle, but in practice. The most important title any of us will ever hold is not ambassador or CEO, but simply human being." The story of Flight 714 became a mandatory case study in business schools and a chilling cautionary tale whispered in corporate boardrooms worldwide. It was a story about how the small, quiet poison of prejudice, left to fester in the dark corners of an organization, can erupt into a raging corporate catastrophe. And it was the story of how one woman, armed with nothing but her quiet strength and the integrity of her convictions, refused to be made invisible. She had been tested not in the grand chambers of the United Nations, but in the narrow, pressurized confines of an airplane cabin. And in winning her personal battle for respect, she had triggered a global reckoning, making the world of travel, and perhaps the world itself, just a little more decent for everyone who came after her. This story is a powerful reminder that the fight for respect and dignity happens everywhere, not just in the halls of power, but in the everyday spaces we all share. Dr. Sophia Vance's experience shows us that one person's courage can truly spark a revolution, forcing an entire industry to confront its own biases. It's a testament to the fact that true power isn't about raising your voice, but about making your voice heard. What happened to Claire and Global Skyways wasn't just karma. It was a necessary course correction, proving that in the end, character will always outweigh prejudice. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story about justice, karma, and the incredible power of the human spirit. What are your thoughts on this? Leave a comment below.